Hello there, and welcome back to the Codex. So I've been grinding out the Nightwave, and I, as soon as humanly possible, unlocked the leaded gas augment for the Vesper 77, and I have to say, I do like it more than I thought that I would, especially with a few synergies, let's call it, that you can use to make this weapon with this augment much better than you might think. First, let's go over just the build itself, the weapon alone. Now here's what the augment does. It's on weak point hit plus 300% gas damage and status chance for 6 seconds. So that's a huge chunk of gas damage and a huge chunk of status chance. In my opinion, there's two main ways to take advantage of this mod. You can feed in to doing an actual status-oriented build and really try to benefit from the AOE gas dot that you will generate by using things like Pistol Elementalist, for example. Or you can use it as just a big raw damage modifier for a Acuity headshot build. Those are the two builds that I'm going to show you guys today. First, we're going to go over the normal multi-shot, proccing lots of status kind of build. So this is what you would, a lot of these mods are probably what you would typically expect. So Target Cracker, Gambit, Crosshairs makes a lot of sense of this weapon for two reasons. One, the unique passive. Also, leaded gas requires weak point hits anyway, so you may as well throw in Crosshairs because you're already going to have to go for headshots. Since I want to have this build be centered around magnifying the gas dot as much as possible, this is why I'm modded for viral. So on the build here, you can see it only shows viral. That's again because the gas damage from this is conditional. You won't see this in the arsenal. It only procs this 300% gas damage in a mission once you get that weak point hit. So it's actually viral and gas when you account for this. So the viral procs, when those go off, will give you a damage multiplier against health that will elevate those gas dots further. We're also using Deadhead again. I think this is the arcane that makes the most sense in the Vesper because you're going to be going for headshots due to the augment. So you get the 360% base damage, and you also get that 30% headshot damage multiplier, which is a really beefy damage increase. And we're using Pistol Elementalist because, again, those gas procs, we want to elevate those. So this is a 1.9x damage multiplier for those gas procs. So very tasty. So basically it's just crit, decent status, headshot multipliers, and Elementalist to just try and beef up those gas procs as much as possible. First, let's show it with just the weapon alone. No Warframe buffs whatsoever. So let's summon in some really low-level guys here to quickly stack up those Deadhead stacks and Galvanized and whatnot, so you guys don't have to wait on that. There we go. Now let's summon some level 225 Steel Path enemies. And this is the performance of the build on its own. As you can see, once those gas procs do proc, you can get some pretty chunky AOE dots on the surrounding enemies around the original enemy that you actually landed a headshot on. So it is a nice way of turning the Vesper into more of an AOE weapon. And just the upfront damage is very good too. Again, we have a lot of crit multiplication, and we have that headshot multiplier from Deadhead. So even without the proc, we're still doing fairly chunky upfront single target damage. So that's what that looks like. Now let's go over the Acuity build, which is definitely more upfront damage. And the only downside of this build, the Acuity build, is that it has a bit of an anti-synergy with gas procs in the sense of, since you're running Acuity, it means you can't modify multi-shot. That's why there's no galvanized diffusion on this build, because if you look at Acuity, it says multi-shot cannot be modified, but you do get that really huge 350% weak point damage bonus and crit chance bonus. But we're only firing one shot each time, so this status chance is all we have. So we're not going to get a lot of gas procs, but when they go off, especially also these blast procs, because I switched over to a blast build instead of viral, when they go off, it's going to be a lot of damage. So the reason why I switched to blast on this is partially because we have Prime T to charge. So since the Acuity version of this build is basically more centered around really huge, chunky one-shot damage, I moved more away from status and into just loading up the upfront damage. So Prime T to charge plus, again, still the leaded gas, big, huge amount of upfront damage. The Acuity, tons of damage. We're also running semi-pistol cannonade. So this gives 300% base damage and 1.5 punch through. Now, keeping in mind that since this says fire rate cannot be modified, it actually makes more sense to run creeping bullseye instead of prime pistol gambit, because this gives slightly more crit chance. It gives 13% more, and that minus 20% fire is going to be ignored. So there's no downside to this. This is just a pure upgrade over Pistol Gambit on this build specifically, thanks to the Cannonade. You'll notice that on both versions of the build, by the way, I am running Stabilizer as an Exilus. Due to some polarity differences, I'm not able to run a max strength steady hands, but at least you can get some of that negative recoil modification on both. That way you can really beam those headshots if you're firing repeatedly. So let's try this version of the build out and see how good the damage is. Again, I'm going to summon in just some really low-level versions of these guys to quickly stack up those galvanized mods in the arcane and whatnot. That should be good. Now let's summon in the level 225 version after we terminate these guys. And you'll see this is quite a bit more upfront damage. And once we actually get those procs to go off, very chunky dot damage. It just doesn't happen again as often. Now, you can use the weapon just like this and get decent performance, especially if you use any kind of Warframe buffs, like the normal ones you would expect, you know, Nourish, Roar, etc., whatever kind of damage multiplier, or playing it on a certain frame like Chroma for Vex Armor, etc., etc. A synergy that I thought of that really specifically feeds in to this augment, both in regards to status and specifically gas, you want enemies to be grouped up, is what if you were to throw on Citrine with the Helmuth from Korra, her Ensnare ability. Since this groups enemies up, and since you're on Citrine, you also get the massive status chance buff from her third ability, the Prismatic Gem. So you get a ton of status chance, even on the Acuity version of the build. So the Acuity version, again, you're not proccing a lot of stats because you have no multi-shot, but you can get the one shot that you are still firing super juiced up status wise and actually get a surprising amount of status procs out there. So when you combine these two things, you'll notice that things get much crazier. Let's go ahead and spawn some more enemies in here. Let's give myself some energy. Let's throw down the status buffing crystal. Let's entangle them. And again, we're still in the Acuity build. Keep that in mind. And you can see, since the enemies are all grouped up, that they just get wiped out. Completely wiped out. Let's do that one more time on the Acuity version, and I'll switch back to the Multishot version of the build. Yeah, let's entangle them. A couple headshots. I mean, you barely have to do anything. You proc like 1 or 2 dots, and the whole group is just totally wiped out. Totally wiped out. And let's go put on a Multishot version again. So this is back to the heavier status implementation of this build. And let's throw out the crystal, throw out the entangle. Gotta get a few headshots to stack up. Once I get going, this next group will be a better example because I didn't have the arcane stacked up and whatnot. So here we go. Group them up again. Couple headshots. And you can see either version of the build, both the multi-shot or the Acuity setup, absolutely shred when you use it on a Citrine setup like this. I'll show you the actual build here again for Citrine, just in case you're curious. It's basically just my regular Citrine build, except I've Helmuthed off her Crystal 4 and Snare. Other than that, a fairly basic, you know, Archon mod heavy Citrine build. You're really heavily benefiting from that stats chance from her third ability, and gas procs really heavily benefit from having enemies grouped up, because then the gas clouds that you form on each individual enemy are overlapping with all of the surrounding enemies. So very tasty. I'm going to go ahead and bring this Citrine build into a Conjunction Survival Steel Path, so around level 180 to 200, and we'll show you a little bit of that gameplay to see what it looks like. Editing codex here. I forgot to mention another synergy in terms of grouping that you can use to benefit on any Warframe is the Nautilus Companion, because if you throw on Nautilus, it has one of the best companion effects in the game of the Cordon mod, which groups up nearby enemies into a clump for you. So if you use this, any frame, no matter what helmet you're using, has some grouping potential. That way, again, you can benefit from those overlapping gas procs. Now, back into the mission. All right, we are here in Conjunction Survival. There was actually a Fissure up, so I was able to do an even higher level version of the mission. So it's level 200 right off the bat, basically. I've switched back to the Acuity version of the Vesper build, because I think the Acuity version really likes the synergy on Citrine of being able to have that super chunky upfront damage, but also have the still very large status chance from her third ability. So again, let's go ahead and use that crystal, group them up. There's so many enemies here. Whew, yeah, I just killed a lot of guys. The crystal itself also shoots out a beam that procs all 4 base elements, so heat, toxin, cold, electric on them, so it adds even more damage to all those groups that you form. So yeah, you can just keep grouping them up inside a crystal radius, headshot a few of them, and once you get any sort of gas proc, you're basically going to annihilate the entire group of enemies. Since you're constantly grouping guys up, you're also adding quite a bit of survival utility to your build, basically, because so many enemies are going to effectively be asleep and just not shooting at you. That survivability becomes much less of an issue. Yeah, this basically turns the Vesper into at least a tiny bit of an AOE nuke. So I really like this augment. It opens up the potential for this to not just be a strong single target weapon, but also kill at least packed up groups of enemies. So I'm happy with it. I'm interested in what you guys think with this kind of performance. Do you like this Citrine Synergy as well, for example? And if you have any other specific frame synergies that you think would be very interesting to pair with this, I would love to know down below, like maybe Lavos with Valence Formation, for example, for even more force status procs, maybe even, you know, double dipping on that blast, for example, or the gas from the augment. But I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to an Acolyte Kill, because perhaps the last thing we should test here is how much damage does this do against single target, beefier guys like Acolytes. So let's go ahead and skip the video ahead, that way you don't have to wait, and I'll see you in just a moment here. Alright, so here comes the Acolyte. And fun fact about Chorus and Tangle is that it also works on Acolyte, so this is going to be a extremely easy Acolyte Kill, because they're not going to be able to move. Yeah, get entangled, silly. And then get headshot. Let me reload here. Headshot, headshot, you're dead. So yeah, it definitely works on Acolytes, I gotta say. Not a problem. And as you can see from the air here and the kills, we're having no issue keeping up with the needs of a survival, you know, getting plenty of kills. Except for when they take my Vesper, very rudely. Give a little another example here of headshotting in a crowd, and then, man, boom, everybody dies. Once you get one of those nice blast procs or gas procs overlapping on that amount of enemies, you basically just shred the entire group. Like I said, it's awesome. I really like the synergy between Citrine and the new augmented Vesper. I think it's fantastic. That's about it, guys. Let me know what you think down below. Is there any other combinations that you want to try out that you think would be really good? And I look forward to the AX52 augment, so I'll have a video on that as well within a day after it's available. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.